Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all, and indeed a few people come up from Gisborne. It's actually very difficult to get out of Gisborne right now because the main State Highway 2 is blocked, and if you want to get out of Gisborne you've got to go in a back road which is gravel. It's probably recommended to have four-wheel drive, and you've got to go in a convoy system. Other than that, you do, like I did, 7 hours travel down to Hawke's Bay through to Taupo and up to Rotorua. So this is the situation we are in now as a result, in our region, of 3 successive civil defence emergencies, one after the other this year, caused by weather events. So the first one on the board, there we go. So in January, Gisborne and Tairawhiti, and when I say Tairawhiti, that's the east coast, was hit by Cyclone Hail. And those photos there are of our beaches, some of our pristine beaches in Gisborne there, loaded up with wood debris, principally probably from pine, a lot of it, but also a lot of it came from willow as well. And particularly down rivers that go through the centre of Gisborne City, the Waimata, which carries a lot of debris. This was followed up almost a month later by Cyclone Gabrielle, which just repeated the event, but made it even worse. Its effect, Cyclone Gabrielle, on beekeeping in the area was quite significant. This is a photograph I actually dragged off the internet, but it's of a local beekeeper's hives just outside Gisborne. I think if it's the right guy, he'd just cropped Manuka honey in the central North Island, transported these hives back to Gisborne, put them in an apiary site, ready to harvest, and lo and behold, they got wiped out with the Manuka crop as well as the hives themselves. He was not insured. So dealing with the aftermath, and these pictures show it, these are some of the local beekeepers. If I can see this, what is that? Right. Trying to get the pointer to go, but anyway, the picture on the left there is of a local stream that had clogged up basically with willow debris. It lifted the bed of the river and lifted them hugely on the flood. There's some hives in the background there. There's a pellet down over the bank. If you look at the photo there, there's some trees right in the background there, some forestry. That flood water went right up and in through those trees. So where I took that photo, it would have been well over my head. Some more of the clean-up. These are some near one of my sites in the Riri Valley, just west of Gisborne. I'd planted some trees for bees on this site there 6 years ago, and they got thoroughly silted and, of course, killed. The ones on the left there will survive. They are okay. And probably more telling, this slide here, it's a lesson to you all. This was a site that I actually had some hives on there in October, and I'd sold down, and another local beekeeper had bought these hives. And I told him at the time, this site is safe because there's no evidence of any flood going through that site in the past. Cyclone Bowler in 1988 sort of set a local benchmark on what you should reckon on around risk mitigation. So if you're above Cyclone Bowler levels, you should be fine. This broke that record, probably by about a metre of silt. That building there, a shearer's quarters, had never had any evidence of silting under it. I'd asked the farmer about it, and no, it was fine. The river in the tree line at the back there has a really good slope on it, and 2 kilometres downstream is a very large falls, local well-known falls called Riri Falls. This area got 80 millimetres in 2 hours, this catchment. Now, it's almost apocalyptic, the effect of what 80 millimetres in 2 hours does. And that's some of the other effects. But the lesson to be learned is that we can't go on past experience any longer in where we site our hives. We have to add an extra layer of risk mitigation. But what works? Over the past, since 2016, I've worked with a landowner. I've got had some hives near this area here. He had problems with this hill in the background there, slipping down and past events and into the creek below and damming it. So I said to him, can I try planting some takasasti? This is a deep-rooting tree that comes from the Canary Island. It's drought-tolerant. It flowers for 3 months of the year, starting from round about now, maybe a little bit next month. It goes through to about September. Brilliant for bees. So we'd planted this over the last 6 years, that ridge line, the idea of letting it seed down that ridge, because it's pretty steep there. You can see to the left of that photo there's a slip. There was some old pines there on the ridge that fell down. One jammed under the bridge just a bit downstream. But tellingly, the rest of that hill held pretty much as it was. And I put that down to the planting along the ridge line. So this wild Gabrielle and other events are pretty bad stories. There are some lessons to be learnt and things to take on board, and I urge you to plant trees for bees. Also, it has a big mental effect on farmers, we know, and beekeepers are farmers. You lose hives down the river, it takes a big hit on your business. So, as a hub, we arranged a beers and barbecue shortly after it, and it just allowed people to relax and talk to each other about the event. Very important. And this is something, a bit more of the region here. It was a photograph taken further inland and up the coast. There was a ministerial inquiry you might have heard about, land use change, and looking at the challenges and what we need to do potentially. It was allowing local people to talk. And that's at a recent Environmental Defence Society conference. And this is Manu Kaddy, he's a local leader. He looked at other uses of the land, and he's talking about Kānaka there, which of course produces great honey, which we haven't done a lot of research on, which has potential. Our hub also held a very successful field day on the 26th of May, and we invited speakers like Martin Lars to come up from Canterbury and others, and once again it brought people together and allowed a bit of collaborative thought and talking with each other. This is the power of collective action, and this is the power of having hubs doing jobs like that. So really, lessons learned. Number one, former considerations around siting no longer apply. It's that short-term, intense rain, like 80 millimetres in 2 hours, that will do the real damage. I've always insured my hives, and I've actually had a claim in the past that probably more than mitigated the cost of premiums over the next 10 years. You need to try and burn and salvage equipment where you can, and it's very difficult. Don't store it up because it might be damaged, There was a biosecurity issue that we had to try and deal with, which was difficult. And thanks once again to ApiNZ, because there was many hives stuck up in the hills that beekeepers couldn't get to. And this allowed them to get some money to help helicopter them out in some cases. Certainly might get diggers in to get them out. And I'd like to make the point that adversity brings out sometimes the best in us. And some of the best things are in talking with each other, collaborating a bit more, using our hub. And also recognise the mental stress that you're under if you've been hit with a very bad event like this. And I'd just like to leave you with a quote from Dr. Rob Carr, who is the chair of the Climate Change Commission. In April, he said, "The current pathway we're on seems to reward sequestration in forests above gross emissions reduction. If we are on that pathway, the Commission's conclusion is we will not meet the target being to keep global temperatures under 1.5 degrees Celsius." So with that, I'll pass over to my colleague, Oksana.
I've been asked to give the perspective of the damage that we had up in Coromandel. For those of you that don't know, I'm a commercial beekeeper. I've been there for 15 years. As a commercial beekeeper, run about 500 hives, and about a third of our hives were affected by the adverse weather events. The impact that we had was quite dramatic. Roads were closed, I'm talking state highways, blocking access to hives and also blocking access to delivery trucks for beekeeping supplies like varroa strips and sugar, as well as extraction bits and pieces for the extraction plant. So we were right in the middle of extraction when this was going on. There was a huge cleanup of farm tracks that we had to do, clearing slips and a lot of trees, and it was a lot of trees that had fallen on the roads. We had power out for 2 days while we were extracting, late harvesting honey, late queen rearing, and late varroa treatments as well. And this is a longitudinal thing, because when you put in, as we were talking about this morning, when you put in your varroa treatment slates, you're taking a risk. So we'll see if there's any adverse effects coming up after the winter. So that's the big poster child photo of the damage up in Coromandel. That's State Highway 25A, the Copaviquai Road. And you can see on the map that there are a whole bunch of other slopes and trees falling down, blocking access for quite some time. This is I live about 5 kilometers north of Coromandel town, and this is about 1 kilometer from my house. So that big slip closed the road for a long time, so we couldn't get to hives that we have further up coast. Again, this is Cool Little Road. For those of you who are familiar with Coromandel, that's the only access road to the north, and you can see the big slip there. And these are really big slips, like this was taken from a helicopter, so it looks small. Ran into a lot of that. That's us in the beekeeping truck, and so we ran into a lot of road damage and diggers working, so that set us back, waiting for them to clear the roads. That's a farm track. That's me and my dog's store. And that's when we first started discovering. That was just on our way into the forest. So that was the first of the damage. And then it got even worse. It looked like it was an earthquake going through, but it was just due to the wet weather. So that was not only were we clearing slips and clearing trees, but also running into damage like that. There are 2 photos there. The one on the left is, again, taken from a helicopter. The one on the right is a farm track in the back of the farm. You see the road's been completely taken out. That road is at the top left of that photo. And you can see that there's a lake. There was no lake there before. What had happened was slip dammed the creek. And it's a pretty small creek. It's a tributary. And that lake was about a couple of meters deep, maybe even, I think it was 3 in some areas, 3 meters deep. And we had to evacuate a settlement called Tairawhiti down the road because there were fears that that dam would break and that they would get flooded out. So they had to be evacuated for a few days while that settled down. It's now gone down. But I mean, there were talks of blowing it up with explosives and stuff. They never did that, but I thought that'd be cool. And then here's another image of that slip that caused that dam and the road that was completely taken out. So, I mean, you can't repair that. Another road, we call this the Shanty Road, and the culvert got blocked with debris. And you can see the water coming over, making a new pathway and taking the road out. And that's us clearing paths. We ran into a lot of slips like that with another farm truck. And not only working with a shovel, but chainsaws. This is our apprentice, Henry. We were very lucky that we told Henry to get a chainsaw certificate before he started working for us. And that really came in handy. So he's usually in a bee suit, but for several weeks, maybe longer, he was wearing chaps. And so that's Henry there, and Henry told me he's got this photo up on his dating site. And that's up towards Fantail Bay, and a lot of damage there, so we you can't see, but up above we have house up there, and had trouble accessing that as well. So it was just all the way up and down the coast. So, what are they saying internationally about New Zealand beekeepers? Well, this is Guardian, and cyclone damage shows New Zealand beekeepers are unprepared for climate change. Now, that's a pretty sensational headline. I'd like to argue that I don't think there are any beekeepers internationally that are ready for this, but we happen to get the headline. They said 5,000 to 6,000 in Hawke's Bay, and I just want to acknowledge all the beekeepers here from Hawke's Bay. But I'm sorry for all the damage that's happened. It's pretty hard going. So I just wanted to continue a bit more about climate stress and beekeeping. What do we know about it? What do these headlines mean, and what can we do to mitigate the issues? There isn't a heck of a lot of research on how climate stress is affecting bees and beekeeping. It's kind of a new subject. We do know the agriculture sector in general has been suffering from irregular seasons as well as extreme weather events, weather droughts, or heavy rain events. Last year, I think Dave Parker would have been at this meeting, the USDA and EPA scientists met on pollinator health, and quote, they determined that climate change is becoming new and formidable stressor for bees, potentially amplifying previously known issues in ways that scientists can't yet predict but need to prepare for. So it's not just scientists, but us beekeepers who need to work together to try and figure out what next. And it's not just climate stress that's affecting the bees, it's climate stress is affecting all the different stressors as well. They're all working together synergistically. So how does climate stress affect your bottom line? So when I did a quick search of what literature was out there, there's a study that came out this year on beekeepers in Europe self-reporting on climate stress. And beekeepers that were heavily impacted by climate change reported lower average honey yields and higher colony winter loss rates. So that kind of underscores what may be coming. How exactly does it affect bees? Well, it can lead to reduced food resource availability, the seasons change. It's a disruption to the flowering seasons. Some seasons might get longer, some might get shorter. Also, there might be a mismatch between the pollinators, so this pollination in general, and the flowers that they're meant to pollinate. Severe droughts and heavy rainfall reduced floral abundance. So this year was a complete washout, literally, with all the heavy rain. Then an interesting study that just recently came out was the impact of CO2, the greenhouse gases increasing. It was a longitudinal study done on pollen that they got from museums like 100 years ago. And when they looked at the pollen content, they found a correlation that as the CO2 has gone up, the protein content in the pollen has gone down. And as you know, protein is what the bees need in pollen. So that's something to keep an eye out. So actually, something that needs to be looked into further. Other health effects, because of the warming temperatures previously unknown to the area, various pests such like the small hive beetle, large hive beetle, Asian hornets, they can invade. Rising temperatures also increase honeybee stress and make them more susceptible to pathogens. And it also increases the chances of Varroa viruses. I can't pronounce that. And that's the effects of Varroa. So that's actually been shown in some pretty recent research that rising temperatures actually make Varroa worse. This is not my slide. This is Peter Newman's. I liked it so much, I borrowed it from him. We've got a paper in press that's coming out soon on climate stress. And so he's got it nicely set up with the challenges and how you can mitigate. Risk insurance is something that Richard will be talking about. And this is a very interesting story. We'll have to improve beekeeper education, and that means also collaboration and communication, working maybe on adapting bees and a lot of supplementary feeding that will probably need to be done. Thinking ahead, I just wanted to finish on this. We are going to need to encourage communication, collaboration between beekeepers and scientists. We're going to need to improve the understanding of the impacts of climate stress on honeybees and beekeeping, and also to reiterate what Barry was talking about with trees for bees, is to ensure that we plan to have adequate nutrition available. So Barry has demonstrated that with planting that forest for the bees and how that helped mitigate the effects of the climate stress in his area. I also wanted to thank Apiculture New Zealand and Karen Haas for keeping in touch with me and finding out how things were going. That really meant a lot to me, that somebody cared, and also for going out and getting that funding to help with all the cleanup costs. That was great. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Richard Kidd, and I've been asked to represent and talk about our experiences in Northland over the most recent summer, and just share what we went through and what our neighbouring beekeepers went through. I was quite lucky that when I reached out to our neighbours, they shared a lot of their stories and their photos, which we'll go through in my talk. I run 1,500 hives based in Kaiwaka, which is halfway between Auckland and Whangarei. We've got 4 full-time staff, and we get our income from pollination, bulk honey sales, export bees, and contract extraction. And we contract extract for about 9,000 hives in the area, so we get to talk and touch base with a lot of beekeepers as they come through, and this summer was a good therapeutic experience. We got to share a lot of stories of what we went through. About this time last year, I was looking at ways to cut costs because it's been pretty tight for a little while, and insurance was something we looked at really closely, and I've made one claim in the last 10 years on hive losses and thought that I'd roll the dice and see how we went the coming season, and saved the $3,000, which was my premium at the time, and we cancelled our cover. Over the summer's weather events, we lost 2 apiaries and 30 hives, so with hindsight it wasn't the right choice, but at the time I feel like I did make the right choice. Certainly this season I'm going to be talking with the insurer about reinsuring my hives for hive losses, because these weather events are quite extreme. We had 3 weather events that were of significance over the course of our summer. The first one was what I call the Auckland flooding event, and that was in late January. Then we had Cyclone Gabrielle, which came hot on its heels. And then we had a real local flooding event, which I'll call the Mangawhai flooding event, which, when we get to it, it was really significant in our area, but just over the hill from us, it didn't affect anyone else. So we'll start with the Auckland flooding event. A neighbouring beekeeper had just finished their honey harvest down in the central North Island and brought their hives back for redistribution in the area. And the intensity of this rainfall and the fact that there was no warning meant that a site that should have been safe, or we'd always assumed was safe, was inundated with a huge amount of water. And as you can see from this photo, out of nowhere, flash flooding came through and these hives were halfway up the brood box. What was really nice about this experience was the amount of people that jumped to their aid. So there was pretty much immediately 3 other beekeepers from various organisations coming to help. We've got the big tractor in the background from the landowner coming through to help, and really quickly the hives were loaded and taken away from the site to areas that were dry. The immediate effect on these hives was that there were about 200 hives in the dump site, and about 30 passed away straight away. The remaining hives had queens and thought that they'd make it through, but over the course of the summer that wasn't to be, and about 70%, I'm told, didn't make it through to winter. And the fact that they had a queen, the stresses that were involved just from being put through this were quite so much so that the hives passed on. In that same flooding event, it didn't just affect this beekeeper but others in the area. It's hard to take photos of hives that have been washed away completely, but on the left there we've got an apiary site that is severely depleted of what hives were originally there, and then sheds that get inundated with water. The pellets kept the water away from contact with the honey and the brood, or the stored honey boxes, but still had a big effect. Hot on the heels of this came Cyclone Gabrielle, and for us and where we are in Northland, that was not only a water event but a wind event. It gave huge damage in the area. I was without power for almost a week in the middle of extraction time with a lot of boxes piling up. That added a lot of stress to what we were trying to do. It didn't help too that suddenly we were lumberjacks instead of beekeepers. We were going around creating access to sites, clearing up trees, just a lot of cleaning. It really paid during this time to have strong relationships with our landowners. Throughout the whole summer it paid to have really good relationships with our landowners. A lot of them were itching for, were just really happy to get in there and help us with our cleanup. It is their tracks too that they were cleaning up and their trees that they were cutting down, but it really helped us with our access, the fact that they were prioritising us getting access to the bees instead of other things within their business. And this is the third event that came through. I've called it the Mangawhai flooding event because that's the valley that I live in Northland. And we had about 400 mils over the 24 hours, but most of that fell within 12 hours. And it was biblical. There was just so much rain coming down. And it was very localised. The Northland Regional Council rain gauge for Paparoa, which in a straight line is only 20 kilometres away, on the same day measured 6 millimetres, and just where we were it was 400, and the damage that it did to our apiary sites and those around us, you can see in those photos there wasn't much left. It was a really hard time to be doing what we were doing. It created, well, all of the events created challenges to get to sites. On the photo on the left there, we had a really good landowner that went and got a digger and cleared the path for us there. And again, I just want to say thank you to the landowners and emphasise how good it is to have strong relationships with your landowners. All three events added infrastructure damages in our area. The photo on the left is my normal road to work. Suddenly I'm driving an extra half hour each way to get to work. The photo on the right is the road to my parents, which will probably never get fixed. My road to work has been fixed now. It only took 2 months. But the one on the right is not a busy road, so it's probably never going to be fixed, and we will forever have to drive an extra 15 minutes to see my parents. State Highway 1 has been open and closed all summer. This is the road over to the Brenduins. We keep 400 hives on the north side of this road. Back and forth to see those hives is an extra half hour on a windy goat track, and it just adds more challenges in a year that was really tough. So the impacts directly to my business, everything took longer. We were later putting our strips in, we were later harvesting honey, we were later making splits. We had hives starving in late February, which I've just never had before. It just was a really hard year to get through. And going into winter, the hives weren't in the condition that we'd really like. Our extraction work was impacted as well. In the middle of our busy season, we were out of action for a week, and the effect of the storms on all our customers meant that instead of shutting down at our normal time in late April, it was late May when we were turning off the machines. So the volumes were well down, and it was trickled in a way that meant we had to keep the machines operating for longer. And late season honey had a higher moisture content than normal. I just want to finish by saying thank you. It was a really stressful season for all of us. Thanks to my family, my staff, our landowners, neighbouring beekeepers. Neighbouring beekeepers is a big one. It was so good knowing that I could pick up the phone and talk to people about this, and maintaining those strong relationships is something I'm really thankful for. And Apiculture New Zealand, I called them a few times over the season, and they were always helpful, and I know that a lot of work went into giving us as beekeepers access to grants and things that I'm really thankful for. So thank you for that as well. And that was the end of my presentation.